Hi, everyone. First up on the docket tonight, the people rest. This afternoon, prosecutors in the Michael Jackson trial said, "We are done." After more than 2 months of testimony from over 80 witnesses, no question, it was a mixed bag for prosecutors, but one pundit today described their last witness as the Kato Kaelin of the Michael Jackson case. Ouch. It's supposed to be a bombshell, but I'm guessing the Kato reference means that he may have just been a bomb. As always, NBC's Mike TAIBBI is in Santa Maria, where he has been following the trial since the beginning. And Mike, we're going to have a full journalist roundtable in a minute of people who've been inside that courtroom every day. But first, let me talk to you about this last witness who testified. This is the great Jackson insider, the one who was supposedly taking notes, who was going to bring Michael Jackson down, and he did not do it?
He did not do that. You know, it's funny, this guy was on the stand yesterday. His name is Rudy Provenzio, who the prosecution never classified as a Jackson insider, but others on their behalf did. A man who was in the record business for many years as a promoter, by his description was sort of a clerk, did a lot of filing, that sort of thing, but he worked with Fred Mark Schaffel, the sort of leader of the pack among the alleged unindicted co-conspirators, worked with him for a while, and he was going to put Jackson right in the middle of the planning for the alleged conspiracy, but he didn't quite do that.
Why not?
In fact, because what he did was, and this was a guy who had the jury eating out of his hand yesterday, Dan. I mean, there were 4 or 5 of them who had fixed smiles. The guy was funny and urbane, and some of them who laughed out loud at his jokes. For example, when the very correct and proper prosecutor, Ron Zonin, asked a question about his 1% interest in a Jackson single that was going to be released, he said, well, what would be the consequence of a point or a percentage in a production such as you've just described? Typical Zonin question. Rudy Provenzio answered, you'd be rich! And he roared his head back, and everybody laughed right along with him, including the judge. Well, today he talked about the 2 buzzwords that the prosecution wanted to get in. Killer, killers, and the word escape. Don't forget, these were the words that were used by the accuser's mother, and Rudy Provenzio testified.
Right, so Mike,
these alleged
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but let me just so I understand this. The bottom line is that Provenzio said today that, yeah, I heard some people talking about keeping that family captive, but it wasn't Michael Jackson who was talking about it, right?
That's absolutely correct. And also, he had never said this in months and months, more than a year of working for the prosecution, wearing wires, taping more than 50 phone calls. None of those tapes got in. None of them had anything that was useful to the prosecution. Only his memory, which, by the way, was jogged by notes he found in a storage locker 2 weeks ago. When he went back to the notes, the dates were wrong. So it was a difficult final day for the prosecution.
All right, Mike, stick around for a minute, because I want to talk to 3 people who've been inside the courtroom, 3 of the best out there. 2 others who have been in court since the beginning, attorney and Inside Edition senior correspondent Jim MORET, who earlier today said, if this witness is the heart of the conspiracy case, then this case is in cardiac arrest. And Court TV correspondent Savannah Guthrie. All right, Savannah, do you agree with Jim and Mike that this final witness did not quite deliver what the prosecutors might have hoped?
Well, I'm never as eloquent or pithy as Jim MORET is, but I do think that the conspiracy case ends up being a little bit disappointing with this witness, Rudy Provenzio. You know, he talked about some things that are inflammatory, and if this were a prosecution against Mark Schaffel, Vinnie Amon, or Frank Cassio Tyson, then maybe he'd be a great bombshell witness. But the problem for the prosecutors has always been, and continues to be, putting Michael Jackson at the heart of this conspiracy.
Don't worry, Savannah. There are almost no one out there who is as pithy and eloquent as Jim MORET. So don't worry, okay? All right.
Thank you.
Jim MORET, let me ask you to look at the prosecution's case as a whole, all right? We've now heard from 83 witnesses, some of them pretty persuasive on some points, others not. I was asked this question on the Today Show the other day. Matt Lauer said to me, between rating it from a 1 to 10, how would you rate the prosecution's case?
And what'd you say?
I said a 5.
I think that's probably a fair assessment. You know, it's true. You've got to look at this case not just from one witness viewpoint, but you've got a whole menagerie of witnesses that really paint this picture of who the prosecution says Michael Jackson is. The big problem is that what's left with these jurors, this last impression, is simply horrible. The last impression is this past few witnesses all dealing with a conspiracy that, frankly, if anything, seems to support Debbie Rowe's contention that, sure, there may have been a conspiracy, but Michael Jackson may have been the target of that conspiracy, not somebody intimately involved with trying to commit a crime, and that's the problem. That might infect or taint the other charges in this case. So I think that the prosecution ended on a simply horrible note. They didn't deliver their promises over the last week and a half, and then they rest. And you think to yourself, is that all there is? You're right, there were some witnesses who were good, and specifically the prosecution has to look to the young boy himself, because don't forget, this is a molestation case. If you believe the boy, the jury may very well find molestation. But as far as conspiracy, I think they're in big trouble with that claim.
Mike TAIBBI, here's my sense from reading the transcripts, and I've only been there for a couple of days of the case, but my sense is that they have proved that Michael Jackson is a somewhat disturbed individual, and that there's something wrong with Michael Jackson in terms of the way he interacts with children, and that he might have done something inappropriate with this child, might have molested this child, but might isn't enough when it comes to proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
No, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. You know, they couldn't even rest their case in a definitive way today, Dan. Tom Sneddon got up, the district attorney, and said, we would be prepared to rest our case using the conditional tense, pending, he said, the admission of the final bits of evidence and the identification of certain exhibits. So even that wasn't done in a clean way, unusually. And there's going to be a motion tomorrow, two motions, in fact. One, the one that we predicted, the motion for a directed verdict of acquittal on the conspiracy charge, and the other, a Griffin-Doyle motion for a mistrial in the case, having to do with, from what I understand, and maybe one of your panelists or you yourself know more about this, some violation of the rules regarding a witness's claims about when he either seeks counsel or makes any statements about his own status in a case. We'll know more about that in the next couple of hours, maybe not in time for your show, but those two motions are going to be argued this morning. The judge has set aside an hour and a half to do it.
And I would expect that those are not going to end up being a major issue in this case. Savannah, let me ask you this, all right? I know my friends over at Court TV. I'm a Court TV alumni. I watch Court TV. But I've seen,
Don't do it, Dan.
I've seen more people on Court TV. No, I want to get a sense of what a lot of the anchors there are saying about how this case has been going. I mean, I've heard, Nancy and Lisa and Kimberly express, some encouragement or some belief that the prosecution's case hasn't been going that badly. What is the sense over there as to how things have gone for prosecutors?
Well, Dan, I mean, I think my colleagues are somewhat predictable in their beliefs about how the case is going. And, you have people who are completely upfront that they have a prosecution or a defense bent. And, it's true not just of my colleagues at Court TV, but I think all of the reporters here covering the trial, if they have a certain way of looking at the case, they hear what they want to hear. And so, I mean, to answer you quickly, I mean...
Come on, Savannah, that suggests that no one can be objective here. Come on. I mean, look... I don't have a stake in this. I'm basically saying that I don't think that the prosecutors have quite, and again, I called it a 5, but I don't think that they've quite delivered what they need to get a conviction, that maybe they'll get a compromise verdict with a conviction on some of the alcohol charges, but I think this defense case is going to be pretty powerful.
I think so too, and I think even the prosecution bent anchors at Court TV probably see some pitfalls in the prosecution's case so far. No case is perfect, that's for sure. But you know what I keep thinking about? This is a case that's going to rise and fall in closing arguments. Before I covered this case, I did the Paul Shanley case, the priest abuse case in Massachusetts, and I have to tell you, I looked at that as having a lot of reasonable doubt in that case until it came time for closing arguments, and that prosecutor in Massachusetts delivered such a powerful closing argument on basically the testimony of one alleged victim, and it was a repressed memory case, and that jury convicted. And I keep thinking about that as I consider this case. We're reporters. We seize on the inconsistencies. We love to catch people in an inconsistency, in a lie, in a misstep.
Yeah.
Jurors aren't like that, and we just have to remember it all comes down to the very end with closing arguments to see how the two sides pull it together.
I have to say, in the Michael Skakel case, the Kennedy nephew, I think the same thing happened. Prosecutors sort of pulled it together in the closing argument. But Jim, what do you think? You think is this case dead?
No, it's not dead, but I think the closing argument would have to be brilliant. Dan, you and I have talked about this. I think on its face, the case had some problems just with this timeline of when
we're going to talk about that.
molestation occurred.
Yeah.
But I think that based on Tom Snedden's opening statement, I think he would have to do a complete reversal and be brilliant on his closing statement. I'm expecting that of Mesereau, frankly, based upon his performance.
I will leave one thing out there. If Michael Jackson takes the stand, throw out every prediction I ever made, because it will entirely depend on how he does on the witness stand. If he takes the stand, all bets are off.